Hello and welcome to Premiere number 7, being presented on Wednesday, March 9th of 2022. Tonight we'll be going through 6 different parts, and so I'd just like to go over those. Now, I will be monitoring the chat room, so if you have questions or if you want to see more of something or less of something, just let me know. But as normal, we'll be doing our 1-minute meditation. And again, consider this as a practice for doing longer meditations, which is what the next session is about. Session 5, Part 2 of Introduction to Meditation. We go further into understanding the frequencies of the brain. And in particular, we want to understand what happens when we meditate for longer than a minute or two, when we start meditating for 5, 10, 15. And hopefully you'll build up to where you can meditate for half an hour or longer. And it's when you meditate for longer than 10, 15 minutes that your body does have a chance. Because remember, the parasympathetic nervous system responds slower than the sympathetic. So the parasympathetic, which induces these lower states, healing states, takes longer. So you need to set, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. A good target to aim for over the next few months is to be able to get to 15 or 20 minutes of setting. Then we'll do the color meditation by popular demand. And then after that, we'll go into the internal map of reality, session 5, part 1 of the timeline. So now we've entered into a new aspect of the internal map of reality. I've been referring to the timeline off and on. But now we're going to go into it in greater depth, and it is a key point, a key aspect. And if you think of how many times in your day-to-day you reference time. Now, something new, I wasn't going to do a video on our next exercise, but then I thought, well, it might be worth it because it does connect to part 1 of the internal map of reality, session 5. So it's directly related to that unit. So there'll be a short little video on the timeline. And then I'll wrap up the evening with a bonus topic, conscious healing, which is one of my favorite topics. I believe that the meditative approach has a tremendous advantage for improving your chances of healing. So we're always in the process of improving. So this conscious healing is a key aspect of your general day-to-day health, and also to be done in conjunction with whatever treatments you may be receiving. It all works together, the holistic approach. So let's move on now. We'll do our 1-minute meditation. Just relax, and remember, you can focus on something in front of you. Something that has no meaning, something inanimate, like even just a spot on the wall. Or you can close your eyes and you might notice the artifact from the optic nerve, a little fuzzy dot, I call it. So you can look at that gently, focus on those things. And then at some point when a thought enters your mind, and it can be a thought from the past, it can be something you're experiencing in the present, a sound, a feeling, an itchy nose, the rumbling of your tummy or something. Or it could be a thought from the future, a frame from the future. You're thinking of something you're going to do next, or something that's going to happen or might happen. All of those thoughts, you can just acknowledge them and then gently let them go, right? Detach from them and go back to focusing on your fuzzy dot or the object or the spot on the wall if you had your eyes open. Okay, so everyone's nice and comfortable now, and we will do the 1-minute meditation now. Welcome to Introduction to Meditation, Session 5, Part 2, Frequencies of the Brain. And we'll be looking into something called bilateral movement, or the balancing of both hemispheres of the brain. In the previous session, we introduced the topic of frequencies of the brain, and in this one, we'll be going further on it. And there's something that I call shadow exercises, or moving very, very gently, very, very slowly. And these can be, these types of movements, Tai Chi is one form of them, Qi Kong is another, where your movements are done to really stimulate a full balancing of all of your neural networks within your brain. They will actually help populate your neural networks. So in the previous session, we were talking about left-right brain balance, and we did the experiment of the hands crossed, the arms crossed. The discomfort you felt when changing from a habit to one that you're not familiar with was really directly related to your lack of neural pathways to access that movement. So by doing these movements, we follow a sequence, and we do it what I call unilaterally, with i.e. one arm or the other. Then we do it bilaterally, do it with both appendages simultaneously, and then we do it bilaterally reverse, where one hand is doing the opposite from the other. So I'm going to describe it here, and then what I will be able to do is, for those interested, I'll be able to get you little videos. The key here that when you're doing these full brain movements, like Qi Kong, there are 3 qualities that you need to really follow to make it as effective as possible. The movements need to be accurate. The more accurate, the better. They need to be slow and soft, very, very slow. Why? Because that is connected to the parasympathetic relaxation nervous system. And you need to visualize what you're doing. So you're not doing the movements listening to something on your headphones like you would if you were on a jogging machine. No, you're visualizing that you're doing something with your hands. You're lifting up a cloud, or you're moving smoke. You're doing something with your body. So the visualization creates neural activity. Very, 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 very important that you not be absent consciously when you're doing these movements. So here's a little pictorial. You see here the person with their one arm by their side, and they just practice moving their arm up and out and down, maybe in a swimming motion. And then they would practice with the opposite arm, right? They would do it, say, with the right arm, then they would do it with the left hand. Then they would do both the same. and then they would do them so that they were syncopated. When one hand is down, the other is up. Now, I'm just describing these verbally, but as I said, I will provide some video links for those who want to practice. So the basic thing is that if you're doing your hands, you move one hand at a time, then both hands at the same time, and then you do them sort of in a balanced reverse motion. This is something that you can practice on your own, and I will get you a video to show you how to do it. Okay, what is this all about? It's about getting the brainwave activity in your neural network vibrating. So when we look up brainwaves in the dictionary, Webster dictionary, the two definitions it says are rhythmic fluctuations of voltage between parts of the brain resulting in the flow of electric current. The second part, part B, is a current produced by brainwaves. Now, two things I'd like you to notice is that it talks about a rhythmic fluctuation. It's like a flow. And the other thing is that it is electrical. So this is about the electric system of your body. Now, when we look at this, and I've been talking about the three bodies, there is an electrical component for the physical body, and there's an electrical component for our energy body and for our spiritual body. So you can see here the hockey player there, very, very physical. So he had to practice rigorously for years to be able to get on the ice and play hockey. However, if your energy level is low, you won't perform as well. So you need to have your energy body. And this is different from your physical energy. I just want to point that out. Your physical energy is important, calories. But then there's another type of energy where if you're going to do anything, you need to be present, and that vitality, I think, is another word that's used. And finally, the spiritual. You see the lady here drinking her pot of coffee. She's obviously distracted. She's not focused. So if you're spiritually off balance and hectic, things won't go. Now, all of these areas affect your brain lateralization. So if you have a physical injury, your brain may not be balanced and it won't be able to function properly. And there are lots of sports activities that can injure the brain, and you can actually see this. Same thing if your energy of your chi energy is imbalanced, and we've talked about meridians already several times. That will affect your lateralization and, of course, your spirit energy. So how is this all working? So we talk about frequencies. We're talking about one full cycle. So I use the example of a circle. So you would start at one point where the circle crosses the line, and you would follow it all the way around to halfway to the other side. That's half a circle. And then all the way back and around again to where you started. So a full circle or full cycle is in fact one complete rotation, 360 degrees around the axis. So that's one cycle. And when we're talking about frequencies being 60 cycles per second or 20 cycles per second or 2, whatever, we're talking about completing the circle every time. So again, if it's 100 cycles per second, it's completing the circle 100 times per second. So then you look at this. If you took that circle, cut it in half, and sort of laid it out, you would end up with this S shape. So you end up with half of the circle on one side and half of the circle on the bottom side. And you would call those phases. So one phase is, you might say, positive, is above the line, and the other phase is, you might say, negative, below the line. Two phrases. So a frequency has two phases, an up phase and a down phase, an on phase or an off phase. In Tai Chi, or in traditional Chinese medicine, we would call that yin and yang. So we call one phase the expressing phase, where you're giving out energy, and I'll color that red so that you can consider that yang. And then you have a phase, a recovery phase, where the energy is returning, and we'll call that yin. So there's your yin and your yang. So your one phase is recovering while the other phase is expressing. And I had mentioned earlier when we talked about yin and yang balance that there were four possibilities, two for excess yang and the other for deficiency. So, and they can look the same. So excess yang in the red here looks the same as deficient yin. And that's where you need to be careful. So excess yang, too much yang energy, can look the same as deficient yin, or right? Similarly, excess yin, too sleepy, can look the same as depleted yang. So we can talk more about that later, but part of the role of the traditional Chinese medicine practitioner is to recognize which of the four meet your situation. Okay, so I want to introduce the idea of the three bodies and the idea of the yin and yang energy and the cycles. So with this pass, we should have a good idea now, what we just covered, that a cycle is a 360-degree completion of a circle, and there's two phases in it. So when we come back, we'll look at how these are actually measured in the brain. So we'll come back, we'll do part 3, and we'll go into a greater detail about the measurements of the brain. Okay, with your eyes closed, sitting comfortably in a chair, we're going to start walking through the colors of the rainbow. And I'd like you to start with the color red. And just let whatever comes into your mind float in. There's no right or wrong way to do this. And just think about the color red. And if you want, you can imagine that when you breathe in, you're breathing in the color red and filling up with red. And when you exhale, you're letting the color red leave your body and go out back into the room. Red. Now we're going to move from red to orange. Just start thinking about the color orange, and whatever comes to your mind is right. And again, if you want, you can imagine that as you breathe in, you're breathing in the color orange, and as you exhale, you're letting the color orange come out and fill the room. And if you have a little bit of that red left, you can let that out too. Orange. Now, we're going to move to yellow. Yellow. And just as before, there's no right or wrong way. Whatever comes to your mind about yellow is right. And if you want, you can imagine that you're breathing in the color yellow, filling up with it, taking as much as you want because it's free. And as you exhale, you can let out the color yellow into the room. And if there's any orange left, you can let that out too. Yellow. We're going to keep moving now to green, brilliant green.
And you can pretend that you're breathing in the color green and filling up with it, brilliant green, and letting it exhale out as you breathe out. And again, if there's any of that yellow left, you can let that out as you breathe out. We'll move now to blue. We'll move from green to blue. And if you want, you can breathe in, fill up with blue, and as you exhale, you can just let it come out and fill the room with blue. And as before, if there's any of the green left, you can let that out too. Blue. We'll keep moving now across the rainbow to purple, deep purple. And just let whatever comes to your mind about purple float in. And again, if you want, you can pretend you're breathing in the color purple and breathing it out as you exhale. Letting out any of the blue that might be left. Finally, we'll move to violet. Violet's almost like seashells, like mother of pearl. And you can imagine you're breathing in fresh violet, filling up with that color and letting it leave your body as you exhale. And of course, if there's any purple, you can let that out too. Violet. And to finish up this little guided meditation, we're going to combine all the colors together and create a brilliant white light. Brilliant white light. All the colors together balanced. And you can pretend you're breathing in this brilliant white light, filling up with it, and exhaling it out as you breathe out, filling up the room with this brilliant, clear, bright, white light. And at any point, you feel you want to open your eyes and come back, you can.
Welcome to the Internal Mapper Reality, Session 5, Part 1, Your Timeline. So we're going to do the 5th session on timeline, and I've broken it up into 3 parts. And the first part is the introduction. The timeline is an integral part of your internal map. And in a sense, it is the one that people tend not to notice as well. We tend to notice the ups and downs in our lives and don't really tend to look at it in terms of how things are laid out on our internal timeline. So we'll go into this, but before we do that, let's look at a quote from Napoleon Hill, who I consider to be one of the first really big promoters of looking at the way we think as being the pivotal, important thing. Now, there were others, but Napoleon certainly made his mark. So here's one of his quotes. "Don't wait. The time will never be just right." And he's so true about that. And if we keep waiting for that moment when things are just right, well, that just might not happen. Okay, so we've done 4 sessions so far. We did the initial session 1, where we took a little look at what a map is and why we have it. And then in session 2, we looked into how we communicate, how we actually think. And this technique of looking at the way we think with our modes of thinking and frames is how we communicate with our subconscious and how our subconscious communicates with us. And this is a universal way of communicating. So you can communicate with any other person on the planet through this technique. And I believe you can communicate with other life forms like plants and animals, because they all communicate through frames of sensory information. Then we went into beliefs, which looks at how we develop strategies or beliefs about what we need to do. So beliefs in this context is about what do you believe that you need to do to satisfy your inner desires. And then we just completed session 4 on filters, which looked at how we eliminate all the information that is not pertinent to our beliefs. So if something isn't key to your strategies for achieving what you desire, you won't even see it, you won't even consider it, you won't even look at it. So filters are a way of distilling down your reality to the key things that you believe are pertinent to getting what you want out of life. Now, filters can be of benefit, or they can, in fact, limit you. So with that in mind, we're going to move on and look at timelines, the way that your understanding of your timeline can limit or, in fact, strengthen you. In future sessions, since we're about halfway through, we'll look at values, and we're going back to what drives our belief system, which is our values, and they are in a hierarchy. And understanding your hierarchy of values is a key thing. So if you have that right, everything else just falls in place. Then we'll look at meta programs, which are the strategies in a more elaborate structure that we have adopted. And some of the things in meta programs are our beliefs in iconic. Why do people worship actors and actresses and people in the media? They become icons. Why do we have icons? And then moving on, as we get to session 8, we're going to start working on strategies for motivation. How can you use this knowledge to be motivated every day to work as hard as you can to achieve what you want? And then we'll be moving further on in section 9, looking at life goals. And then in the final session, session 10, we'll be looking at modeling. And there's 2 types of ways that we can model ourselves and get information from other people's behaviors, both successful ones and unresourceful ones. I won't go into the resources too greatly. I've done this each beginning of each session, but I'll leave this up for a moment and you can look at it later. Okay. And of course, our Patreon level members will receive more guided instruction. Contact information, and again, if you want to reach me, just go to my Proton Mail, STO2015 at protonmail.com. Or if you're a Patreon member, you can just message me through the Patreon system. Okay, so the internal map of reality, the timeline, what is it? So we'll be talking about what the timeline is and how it's constructed. Then we'll look at how our subconscious works with time, and our subconscious has a different perception of time. Then we'll look at the direction finder. I've mentioned the direction finder filter before, but we'll take another look at it in deeper detail. And then we'll go and look at some other filters or the ways that your timeline modifies or in some way guides your perception on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. So we'll be looking again at frequency counter, the convincer, the limiter, and the social binder. Now, there are other aspects of your timeline filters that are important, and hopefully you'll be able to identify some and share them with us. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up in the last part, dealing with root cause events. What events in your past had such a transformative experience for you that you have changed and you are no longer the same? Now, some of these root cause events are extremely positive and should be just treated as that, a blessing, but others are not. Others root cause events have caused us to limit ourselves and to adopt behaviors which are not resourceful. And then how can we cleanse those from our timeline? And that's what the last part of this is. We'll actually be talking about a guided meditation for cleaning and preparing your timeline for a more successful future. Some terms that we'll be going through, again, we're talking about root cause event. I mention this repeatedly because it's important. And anything that I repeat is something that I consider to be of vital importance for you to understand. And one of the aspects of the timeline I think is important is how you are oriented. How are your goals in life oriented? Do you have a past orientation, a present orientation, or a future? How do you make decisions about what you are going to do next? By looking at the past, the present, or the future? And then there's an aspect here where there's knowledge. You have knowledge, but it's knowledge that you are not conscious of. A real kind of basic example of that is that you know how to heal your skin if you get a cut. Well, you do because you do it, but you do not have a conscious understanding of the steps required to stop the bleeding, to put a temporary scab over the wound, and then to heal the various cells and to bring it all together, and then to release it. You don't know how to do it, but you can do it, and you do it all the time whenever needed. So we are riddled with this unconscious knowledge. Part of my job is to get you to trust that and to seek out and find other types of hidden knowledge that you have and that you have as an ability, and to trust it. And then finally, something that I call timeline reconciliation. When you have reconciled all of the previous things on your timeline, you automatically resolve the future of your timeline too. By cleansing the past, you cleanse the future. Okay, so that's what I call reconciliation, or cleansing your timeline. So what is a timeline? So you can think of it as a series of chronological events from the time you are born until the present, and then projecting up into the future. And your timeline is organized and sorted and maintained in your subconscious. And you may not even be aware that you are doing this, but every event is cataloged in a frame, and the frame is stored. So if you are to think back, as the example we used some units ago about our first day of school, you will pull up a frame and it is located on your timeline. Then, next to that frame where your first day of school is located are other frames that are closely related to that period in time that you now have access to. So this is a way when people are using various types of memory recall or regression, is you remember the things that you can easily recall, and then you can begin to discover the things that are adjacent to it that you can then, which were previously hidden from you, that maybe become revealed. And any of you that may have had hypnosis or watched a hypnotic procedure to recall events, that's basically how you do it. Okay? So your timeline is personal and it's unique to you. Okay? No one else's timeline is identical. Maybe some similarities between you and, say, your sister or your brother, but none of them are identical. Now, here's something that I want to let you think about, is that your timeline can extend beyond your birth. So you have a date or a time when you were born, and then your timeline starts. But in reality, your timeline extends into your past. So you are today dealing with events and things in your past lives. And by past lives, I mean your ancestral past. What did your grandfather, your great-grandfather, etc., what did your descendants do that are affecting you today? And I know many people that are going through day-to-day feelings of stress based on not what happened to them in their timeline, but what happened to their ancestors in their timeline. So it's very, very common. So when we do the timeline cleanse, we may in fact have to go beyond the point where you were born to previous lives that have affected you today. So to do this, we're actually be going to what I call hidden information. So this is the unconscious knowledge. Your subconscious knows exactly what and when things began to impact you, but you don't need to know that. So there's information that is really like data about things that you experience or your ancestors experienced that are affecting you today. So this information has no real emotional content. The emotional content is stored separately. And this is the key to healing your timeline, is that if you find an event that is emotionally charged that may be affecting you today, you have the ability to discharge or release or let that emotional energy go. Okay? And this is called a release. So you have that ability and you have that power. The trick is, if you are unaware of that, if it's hidden information, if you're not aware of that, then you can't release it. So part of what we'll be doing is learning how to use our subconscious to release content, emotional content. In most cases, you probably want to keep the information about previous events. Some of it may be very pertinent or relevant to you today, but not all of it. Okay, so to wrap this up in this slide, what I'm saying is that when we'll be cleaning our timeline, we'll really be neutralizing emotional content. And that's the key there. So for your subconscious, time is always one context. It's always now. So your subconscious does not parse out the future, does not parse out the past, does not parse out previous lives or ancestral lineage. It only looks at a frame, it looks at the content of the frame, and then assesses whether there's a mental state change required or a behavioral change required. In all cases, your subconscious will evaluate a frame as to whether it is something that needs to protect you from. So your subconscious is always going to protect you. So if a frame has material that is in some way stressful mentally or emotionally, the subconscious will just hide it. However, your subconscious always remembers the content, always remembers the frame, and always reacts. So your Your subconscious, it's always now, it always remembers, and it always reacts. And the key here is that if this is done via a filter, then your subconscious may prevent you from experiencing something in your conscious level. There's a lot of reasons why your subconscious would want to do that, because what we really want is to be focused on the content that you need to work with to achieve your next step or your next level. Okay, so your subconscious knows that, and if there's material that would be disruptive, it just hides it. I often think of this one aspect of the power of filtering. You could have a spirit, a guiding spirit standing right beside you now, and you not see it, hear it, feel it, or acknowledge it. Why? Because it has no value for you to become conscious of it. It doesn't change the guidance and the help that that spirit may be providing you. And for most people, to be aware of an entity standing beside you would be very frightening. It would bother me. And your subconscious knows that. And I'm not saying that there are spirits standing beside you at this moment, but a lot of people do believe that there's other levels. But it's not relevant for you to be aware of those on a moment-to-moment basis. Why? Because you need to be aware of the specific content necessary. So this filtering process is huge, and we'll be looking at it more and more. So there's a way around this filtering process, which is to just let your subconscious do it. Okay, so here's one aspect of your timeline that your subconscious is implementing on a moment-to-moment basis, which you may not be aware of. You perceive time in a specific location. You may perceive time to be directly ahead of you as that arrow pointing towards the present. And you may view the future as something to your right or to your left. This is like a direction finder. So where are your past events located? Is the past, when you see people look, they kind of look to maybe their left or to the right when they're thinking of the past. And if you watch people talking about past events, you can look to where their eyes move. So this particular orientation of the direction finder is sometimes considered to be the personality type of a judger, someone who can see their present, their past, and the future laid out in front of them, much like the way a judge would judge events that are happening. So if you have a table and you have some events that are in the past in one part of the table, your present in the center of the table, and the future events, you can then kind of manipulate it like a chessboard or like a game, i.e. like a judger. So this way of looking at your timeline or processing your timeline, it will affect your personality. But let's look at another orientation of your direction finder. The direction of a perceiver. So you have your future. For a perceiver, will tend to see the future as somewhere. And if you ask someone who's a perceiver a question about the future, you'll again watch their eyes. You'll see they'll tend to look straight ahead, right, or slightly up. And their past, they may even point to their back when they're talking about the past. They may even flash their hands and say, oh, that was in the past, right? And you see people make those gestures. So people who make gestures about their timeline as an expanse in front of them, like a judger, and those that talk about it as something behind them is the past. The key thing here is look at the present. The present has a very ambiguous kind of thing. It's kind of left or right. So this jumps up. If we look at these personality types, And we'll be going more into personality types when we go into meta programs. But let's just look at these two main types here. People who are judgers will tend to organize and be prepared. They like to make a plan. They are comfortable following rules. And I kind of think maybe I fall into that category. I like to be organized. I like to make lists and make plans. But there are people who are more perceivers, and they like to keep their options open, which is that ambiguity of the, let me go back here. That's the ambiguity of the present, right? They like to keep it left or right open. And perceivers are very spontaneous, okay? So if you know someone who kind of falls into the category of a judger, or you know someone who falls into the category of a perceiver, ask them that question and here's the question, if you were to point at to where your future is located, where would your future be? Would it be in front of you, behind you, to your left, or to your right? And then match that up with whether they are a judger or perceiver. So that's your exercise 10, is to play with the direction finder of your timeline. Do it for yourself. Identify your orientation of where you see the future. And are you a judger or a perceiver? Then gently do that with some of your friends and see if this actually is true. And then later on, we'll learn how you can flip yourself between being a judger and a perceiver by merely changing how you perceive your timeline. Well, that's it for part 1, and we'll be continuing on with part 2, which is looking at more details of the timeline filters. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, contact me, and do it. Now, what I will be doing, I'll be sending out a separate little video to the Patreons on the timeline exercise. And welcome to Internal Map of Reality session exercise number 10. Today's exercise is about the timeline. So we're going to be doing the follow-up of the first part of session 5, where we looked at how you orient your timeline. How do you perceive your timeline? So what I wanted you to do was to work with that and to actually think about where you visualize your future and your past. And I also want you to consider the personality type of being a judger and a personality type of being a perceiver, and we'll go over those in a moment. So the direction finder deals with how you conceptualize where your past and future lie. Do they lie in a line in front of you? So if you can envision yourself sitting at a chair at a table, and in front of you on the table is you see all the things that are in your past on one side, your present in the middle, and your future on the other. So it's laid out like a vista, like a panoramic view. The other way of seeing your timeline is to visualize it running through you, that the future is directly in front of you where you're looking, and then behind you is your past. So in a sense, you're walking away from your past towards your future, or you're in a vehicle driving down the road towards your future with your past behind you. Note here that the present is defined in a very different way. It's not as specific as the past and future in this particular way of perceiving your timeline. Because you are in the timeline, strongly associated with the timeline by it running through you, the present then is a different concept. When we look at the other way of viewing your timeline with it being laid out in front of you, The present is a specific location. It's right there in front of you with the future and the past to either side. Now, once you've done that, and maybe you've tried it out with a few other people and you've figured out where your past and future are. Now, if you have difficulty with it, no problem. You may be one of the few people who see their past and present differently. You may see your future as up in the sky, in the clouds, and the past being down towards the earth. You might see your future as a ring around you, radiating out in all sides, like the ripples when you drop a stone in a pebble in a lake, in a water. You get that ripple effect. All those are okay, but the majority of the times it'll be like this, as shown here in this graphic, with it all laid out in front of you, where you can be the judger, and then with it running through you, with the future directly in front of you, and you are a perceiver. Now, in terms of making an assessment of whether you are a personality trait of a judger and a perceiver, and this matches up with the way you perceive your time, take a look at these definitions and see if it matches for you. You can also go online and search for personality type judger, personality type perceiver. Okay. Now, as a judger, you tend to be organized and well prepared. And that's kind of like I like being organized, I like being prepared, I like having a plan. Whereas if you're a perceiver, you're okay with things being spontaneous and going with it on the fly and being flexible. Now, I want to make a point here that both of these are great. I mean, if you need to be a judger, be a judger. If you need to be a perceiver, be a perceiver. The goal of this particular course in the internal map of reality is for you to realize when you are one or the other, and then to develop skills to be able to be whichever trait is advantageous or resourceful for you. Okay, so that's the exercise, and we'll take time to discuss it. Hopefully Rose will be back the next few sessions, and we're going to have a live interactive discussion about it. Take a crack at it. Send me an email if you have questions. And remember, these exercises are important to do, because you actually can't discover some things until you try to actually get your feet wet and do them. Ta-ta for now, and see you in the next session. Hello, and welcome to bonus topic number 9, B009. And today's topic I am titling Conscious Healing. And by healing, I mean our day-to-day healing process that we normally conduct. And it's in a range where most of the healing we do, we don't go to a doctor for. When we need the assistance for a medical practitioner, we do need to get one. So this isn't about not getting proper medical consultation. But the bottom line is that when it comes to healing, even the most recognized and renowned medical practitioners will say that it's the individual themselves that does the healing. So this is meant to be an adjunct, or something that goes along with your process of healing, whatever it is you need to heal. So I'm assuming that if you need any particular specialized help, you will get it, but understanding that there's a level of responsibility that you yourself have to take. So that's the conscious healing idea. So when we look at it, there are some aspects that I think are important. And there's something that I'd like to share with you that I call conscious healing or conscious awareness. And it involves something that's called entropy. And we're going to talk about entropy, which is a recognized phenomenon that happens in our reality to all matter. It goes through this thing called entropy. We'll talk about that. Then within our particular reality, each individual has a subconscious system that sets up a series of rewards or punishments to help you stay focused and to move on. And these rewards or punishment, if not heeded, have no effect. But it's only when you listen to your subconscious, when it's giving you the indicators, the rewards are telling you the directions to move towards, and the punishment are telling you the things to move away from. And this is all trying to take you to something called the creative force. And it's this creative force that originally created you from a single cell and to a multi-cell organized individual that is with us today. So this creative force is the ultimate force. So if you are in line with that creative force, then if healing is going to take place, it will take place because of this healing force, regardless of what external forces you apply on the individual. If the creative force doesn't have the freedom or the will to be there, then healing will not take place. So cultivating this creative force is important. And the way to do that is through the feedback loop, by being conscious and working with the feedback loop. And then finally, I'll end it with a little discussion about the rules of the road. Okay, so let's dive into it. So entropy is a phenomenon where everything in our reality, all matter, all energy, all forces, tend to do the same thing. They tend to move from the hot to the cold. So if something is hot, it will tend to move towards cold. And the important thing here is, if you look at this match burning, that it will eventually extinguish itself and become cold. It will release all of its energy. But you can't do the reverse. Once the match has been lit and released its energy to the environment, it can't then go backwards and reconstruct itself. So entropy tends to be in one direction. And this is a bit of a puzzle. And this was looked at quite seriously for many, many, many years. Philosophers and scientists debated how life could exist if everything, in a sense, is going in one direction. Everything is extinguishing itself, that all hot energy will eventually become cold, that things are expanding and will eventually reach some kind of end. But this doesn't appear to happen. Why do we continually have new life when everything, by definition of entropy, is expanding? You can look at it another way. If you look at these two images here, the one on the top is showing you two different types of matter. Okay, they're in a container, and the likelihood that the matter would organize itself such that all the similar particles would be together, separated, is not really the way things are in nature. The spontaneous way things are in nature are on the right, where things would be spread out and dispersed. So the classical experiment is where you put one drop of a dye color in water, and eventually that color, whatever it is, red, blue, will mingle with the clear water, and eventually you will not be able to see it. So the tendency in nature is for things to disperse and to become what is sometimes called disordered random, as opposed to an organized. And when you look at the figure in the bottom of this thing, if for the individual throwing bricks, what's the likelihood that the bricks would pile up by themselves and form a wall? It's more likely that they would end up in a pile of disorganized bricks. This is the example of putting a bunch of scrap metal in a jungle and coming back a few years later and there'd be a locomotive or a brand new car assembled. Things do not assemble themselves naturally. They tend to be random, like the bricks falling in a random pile. So why is it that in life things heal? Why don't things just continually go into a disordered fashion and dissolve? So another example of this is that everything ages. So if you buy a new car, it's not new. The moment you get into it, it's not new for long. The moment you get into it and drive it, it's not long before that new feel, that new smell starts to go away, and the car begins to age. A few years later, the car starts to show its age, and then at some point in the future, the car no longer functions the way that you like, and you sell it and get a new one. So this entropy is happening to everything. You might say that illness is a form of entropy, that the body becomes unorganized, that it's no longer able to function the way it can. Well, the thing is that entropy is the reason things organize. It's because you are having a problem that makes you correct. So your subconscious has a system of rewards, the carrot, or punishment, the fork, to make you become aware of things. So you might notice that if you have an injury, that you become super aware of it. If you have even the slightest little cut on your foot, you notice it, you become aware of it. So your subconscious is saying, pay attention. So when you begin to focus on something, you will immediately begin to repair it. The worst kinds of diseases that you can have are the ones that have no symptoms or that you are not aware of, right? So they say those silent killers, right? So you need to become aware to heal. So the premise is that your subconscious will give you rewards and punishments to move you to heal. This is something we do naturally. So you might say the punishment might be the pain that you feel or the discomfort you feel when you're not well. And the carrot is the memory of what it felt like to be able to move freely and not have that pain in the foot or whatever it is. Okay, that draws your attention. But it goes deeper than that, because this creative force is extremely powerful. This creative force created you from a single cell. And when this creative force is focused, and I think I mentioned in the previous introduction to meditation course about left brain and right brain balance, when the focus is there, and you can use meditation for this, when you focus, then this creative energy starts to act. If it's unfocused, then the creative energy doesn't act. So this little daisy was able to break through the asphalt, right? Because the force of this focused plant is extremely powerful. So how does this work? So it works by a feedback loop. And you should be familiar with this graph by now. So you have something that's important. In this example, we're talking about something that needs to be healed or repaired. Then you automatically, subconsciously start generating ways of achieving that healing. Your body does it automatically. But it's more effective if you are focusing on the outcomes of what you're doing. So as you focus on the condition and you become more aware and you focus on the outcome, and this all happens more or less subconsciously. So you're not necessarily aware of it all happening at all levels. But your subconscious begins to see if it's working or not and makes adjustments. And a lot of this happens in the medulla oblongata in the midbrain that regulates your whole metabolism. And keeps you in homeostasis. Now, if you are not paying attention, if you are not focused, then the body can get out of alignment. I remember days when I was working on projects, and I would be so focused on completing the project that I would actually be hurting myself, and I would actually be exhausted. And when I finished the project and went, I was really tired, and in fact, I had pain. I had actually injured by working so hard on the project. However, by staying focused, you become aware of the alignment and balance of the body. I have a process called 3-body centering, which I'll share with you later on. But it's just at this point, just be aware that being focused, being conscious, you will automatically begin to heal. And this is the way it works. If you're in a car and you're on an icy road and you have to make these various curves and turns on an icy road, where is it you put your attention? Where do you focus? And there's a basic rule of driving on slippery conditions. There's a basic rule about where you put your attention. Well, you may know it, or you may recognize it by now, is that you focus on the white line. You focus on the center of the road, regardless whatever the car is doing. Doesn't matter what the car is doing, you keep your focus there. And the reason is that you will tend to steer the car where you are looking. So in this example here in the picture, you don't steer at the guardrail. And if the car begins to sway and begins to show signs of skidding, you don't look at the ditch and the guardrail, or you don't look at the other side where there's that little bit of mountain. You steer right at the center of the road. You steer where you want to go. You look towards, you focus on the health that you want to achieve. So this is just a little discussion about conscious healing, and I hope that gives you something to think about, that if you focus, the tendency for your subconscious is to always improve, to always heal. That is the tendency. That's the direction you will always go if you focus. And it's only when you lose focus that things begin to become a problem. Some people say that the process of acupuncture really is just to put needles in a place just to make your subconscious become aware of where you need to send in energy. In any event, I hope you found that interesting, and we will see you in the next session.